Welcome, adventurers. Today on Rebel Then King, we are again going to take a look at some class builds, this time focusing on the Alchemist, pre-Player Core 2, so that we get a sense of what the class looks like now and then can rebuild these characters afterwards to see what kind of improvements we can make. First, let's talk about the Alchemist class, which I kind of call the problem child of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That's because it is truly one of a kind. It's not truly magic, and it's not really martial either. It's a whole new set of rules just for this class, just for you. It kind of has some non-viable subclasses, if you ask me. I think that Bomber is pretty good, and so is the Chiren. But let's talk about the Toxicologist. Poisons require hitting. Okay, most things require actually landing an attack. But then that also requires the enemy failing the save against the poison. And then usually you kind of need a little bit of time for the effects of that poison to really stack up. Yes, you do get some initial damage from the first stage of the poison, but the true power of poisons is in subsequent stages, and that's sort of a lot to stack up in your favor in order for this to work out. Poisons then do take time to reapply, or you would need to stash up on a lot of pre-poisoned blades. Oh, and then, some creatures, a lot of creatures are going to be immune to poison. And also, there's not really a level 1 feat for the toxicologist. There is something with blowgun. We'll talk about that later. And then the mutagenist. Mutagens give some good with some bad, and it's usually pretty bad and not that good. The only extra subclass ability that is granted to you is the mutagenic flashback. You get to reactivate a mutagen once per day as a free action. I think that's only okay. I wish it was a little bit more, or maybe that you could combine mutagens at level 1, something like that. And there really aren't any level 1 feats for this subclass. So for having only 4 subclasses, having 2 of them not really be that useful is not that great. And then another problem with the Alchemist is inventory management, if you ask me. At lower level, you will run out of your stuff. You'll run out of your goods. This doesn't really happen to other subclasses because, casters at least have cantrips, and martials, especially if you're a melee martial, well, you just keep swinging that sword, and it doesn't matter how many times you do it per day, you just keep going. As an alchemist at lower levels, I was watching my inventory like crazy. It made the game kind of not fun to play because every time you'd use something, you'd think, whew, that's 1 fewer, and then I'm going to be stuck like with a dagger or a sling and basically just be almost an NPC at that point. And then at higher levels, well, it's going to get really complicated, and you will need spreadsheets to keep track of everything that you would do. I did this every day, every adventuring day, I should say. And then you'll also find you won't be able to carry everything. If you are making a bunch of advanced alchemy early in the morning, you'll have to make things and have someone else in your party carry them for you. So kind of a lot of problems to overcome with the Alchemist, but there is hope. I love the flavor of this class. It is the first class I played, and it is because of the flavor. I like that it's one of a kind. I like that it's not using magic, and I like that it's not just hitting things. It's cool to be a crafter and use crafting as your core combat and outside of combat utility. There's also the hope of versatility. You learn a lot of formulas as an alchemist. It's much easier to learn formulas than it is to add spells to your spellbook, for example. And you can quick alchemy anything in your inventory list at any time. So this would kind of be like a caster being able to cast any spell from their entire spellbook at any time, and also the spellbook is like 5 times the size that it normally is. There is also a very high ceiling, a high potential for this class. If you can target weaknesses, you can be the hero. You can go into encounters, pull off the right bomb, and deal devastating damage plus splash damage, and then even on a miss, you'll do some splash damage, which will trigger that weakness. And there is the potential to be a high damage dealer and really be the party hero with this class. And then, of course, this is going to be remastered in Player Core 2, and I'm very, very excited about that. But let's take a look at the 4 subclasses, the 4 research fields now, starting with the Bomber. I am beginning with a Acrobat Goblin Bomber. Now, this is the iconic ancestry for the Alchemist for good reason, and we're going to take a look at that. This build that I have is Ancestry Goblin, background Acrobat, And the class is Alchemist with the subclass, the research field of Bomber. I built out a +3 dex, +1 con, maxed out intelligence, didn't bother with the penalty from the Goblin ancestry and wisdom, and then I built a +2 into my charisma. Let's take a look at some of the notes I have on this. This is an acrobatic climbing chaos machine. Let's talk about climbing. Starting with the tailed goblin heritage, you have a +2 to athletic checks to climb, and it also grants you the combat climber feat, so you can keep a free hand open during combat while climbing. And then the acrobat background will grant you steady balance, and then you can also use acrobatics to catch a ledge rather than reflex. So the idea here in combat is to climb to a vantage point and start lobbing bombs. Ideally, you'll be somewhere where you're completely safe and you don't get hit at all. And then also you'll be able to ignore cover because you would be above. Keep in mind that the fire bombs, like Alchemist Fire and the Tallow Bomb, will gain damage due to the Burn It ancestry feats. Let's take a look at Burn It. Your spells and alchemical items that deal fire damage gain a status bonus to damage equal to half the spell's rank or 1/4 of that item's level. Minimum bonus 1. I think this is sort of why the Goblin is the go-to for a bomber. It's chaos, it's fire, it's just what you do. One good thing to keep in mind with the alchemical bombs is that a lot of them damage and debuff. The Tallow Bomb, Skunk, Pressure Bomb all have some extra abilities. Tallow can leave a creature sickened. Skunk also sickened. And then Pressure can actually knock characters prone. So keep that in mind. And then also Bottled Lightning, I don't have that in my notes, but that will leave a creature off guard if you hit. So those are all really good ways to do some initial damage, but then also debuff that enemy and then let the rest of your team pile on that enemy and take them out. With this build, because of the background of being a performer and being a goblin and getting a little charisma, this can also be a bit of the face of the party. You can intimidate as a combat action. That's going to be a great option for you. And then there's pretty good diplomacy, deception training as well. Out of all of the research fields, to me, I mean, I played as a bomber. It is the most fun. It is the most viable, if you ask me, because a lot of the bombs are pretty decent. They will deal splash damage even on a miss. You have the ability to target a lot of weaknesses. It's a pretty good route to go. But now let's move on to the Chirurgeon, which I think is also a pretty decent option. Here I have a Null or Colo, Clocksmith Chirurgeon. Ancestry, it's still called Null in Path Builder, but it's renamed to Colo. The background is a medicinal clocksmith because we are combining crafting and medicine here. And the class is Alchemist, and the research field, the subclass, is Chirurgeon. This is going to be a bit of a team healer and a tank. Let's take a look at the healing abilities first, starting with what the Chirurgeon subclass has to offer us. We use crafting instead of medicine due to the research field. So you get to max out your healing abilities because our ability scores are a +3 strength, +1 dex, +1 con, +4 maxed out, again, intelligence. The +3 strength is because this will be a bit more of a melee combatant. The con is to be survivable in melee, and then the intelligence for the max number of reagents and also a max roll on your healing checks. And then the background grants us risky surgery. And remember that the Chirurgeon does allow us to use feats that require training in medicine with our crafting, so we can use this feat. As far as healing items go, you will have the Elixir of Life and Numbing Tonic, and those are things you probably want to prepare in spades in the morning. Especially the Elixir of Life is good for healing after combat or emergency combat healing as needed. And Numbing Tonic is a very good one that is a bit of a pre-buff or something to use in the first round of an engagement. It might be a good one to give to yourself and then tank up front, or to give to your barbarian or someone like that who will be up front as well. I do suggest for your daily preparations for this, using maybe not all 6 of your reagents a day. We are getting an extra reagent per day by taking the class feat Alchemical Familiar, and one of the familiar abilities for an alchemist is extra reagents. You basically have some reagents growing on your familiar. This is a great option for the alchemist, but one of my complaints is it's maybe arguably the best, and it's hard to not just go with this all the time. I should jump real quick back to my bomber. I did use the quick bomber class feat for the bomber. I just want to take a look at class feats. Level 1, real quick. Alchemical Familiar, which I talked about. Alchemical Savant, which helps you identify. I guess that's good if you're going with like a sort of researchy type of build. And then there are 2 bomber feats, Farlobber and Quick Bomber. I mean, technically any class can take these, but obviously it's a little more geared, or subclass can take these, but it's obviously more geared towards the bomber. And then Subtle Delivery, which we'll talk about, which is geared towards the toxicologist. So there's not really a option here for a more chirurgeon focused feat. So I just went with sort of my default Alchemical Familiar. But yeah, you want to prep a lot of elixirs of life and maybe a couple of numbing tonics in the morning so you get more use out of those reagents. And then in combat, you are given this nice unarmed attack, Jaws, so go ahead and use that. You're going to keep a free hand for your shield, for shoving, for tripping, those kinds of things. And remember, you gain a bonus to shove and trip due to your heritage. You gain 10 hit points from your ancestry instead of 8 and gain a +1 circumstance bonus to athletics checks to shove or trip foes. So that's a really good heritage option for this build. And then you can buff your combat skills even more by taking maybe like the Juggernaut Mutagen to be even tankier, or do some extra damage and maybe target weaknesses with the Energy Mutagen. I did note here, because you're going to have to buy healer's tools and it's kind of expensive. We are going with a breastplate because medium armor, and just a wooden shield for now because healer's tools cost, but you want to upgrade that to a steel shield as soon as possible. Things that I would like to see improved here, I kind of already talked about. There's no combat bonuses for the subclass, and there aren't really any level 1 feats, so hopefully that gets improved a bit in Player Core 2. On to the third build. This is an Orc Gladiator Alchemist. This is someone who used to be a gladiator and used mutagens to amp up the show, to hype themselves up and to do special things in the arena. So the ancestry is Orc, background is Gladiator, and the class is Alchemist, with the subclass, the research field, being Mutagenist. I went with a +3 strength because this is going to be a melee combatant, +1 dex to help out with armor class. Didn't have anything left to put into constitution. Just a +3 intelligence on this one. And then a +2 charisma, because this will also have some performance and slightly be the face of the party abilities. As far as the backgrounds goes, or as far as the heritage and everything goes, I did go with the Hold Scarred Orc. That will give us some toughness in combat. As far as the rest of combat abilities go, again, the Juggernaut Mutagen also helps improve your toughness by giving you some temporary hit points. In combat, I did choose the Orc Weapon Familiarity. That will let us use the Knuckle Dagger, which is good damage while keeping a hand free. The Deadweight Mutagen is a pretty cool one. I don't remember seeing this before, so it must be somewhat new. This will give you a bonus to shoving and tripping. So you've got this pretty decent athletics. You're going to have a hand free, and you can do some debuffing while you're up there. And then again, the Energy Mutagen, if you haven't noticed, that's a bit of a go-to for me. You can do a little bit of extra damage and a lot of extra damage if you know how to trigger a weakness on an enemy. As far as being a bit of the party face, you have +2 charisma. That's not too bad. You have the Gladiator background, will give you impressive performance feat. The Theatrical Mutagen and Silver Tongue Mutagen are also alchemical formulas I recommend picking up for this build, because both help out in some of your charisma-based skills. And then the cognitive mutagen can help out with recall knowledge, which is another good way to get through exploration. Things to improve with the mutagenist. Most mutagens aren't great. I kind of talked about that earlier. But here's an example. The bestial mutagen. You gain a +1 item bonus to unarmed attacks and athletics. But, you're a +3 strength. So for and also the negative side of the bestial mutagen is you sacrifice some AC and reflex saves. So you would take that, lower your armor class, lower your reflex saves, just to get an extra +1 to your attacks and be on par with a standard martial. I think that's pretty objectively terrible. Another example is the choker arm mutagen. You extend your reach but suffer a penalty to your attacks, and you're already less accurate than other martials, so you could be a mutagenist with like a +5 to your reach attack, or be a fighter with a reach weapon and have a +9. That's not good. That's just objectively not good. Another thing about the mutagenist is you can only be under the effects of one mutagen at a time, at least at lower levels. So I think it's kind of tough to get the most out of it. And then I feel like there needs to be something more for this subclass other than mutagenic flashback. Reminder that is frequency once per day you experience a brief resurgence of a mutagen. Choose one mutagen you've consumed since your last daily preparations. You gain the effects of that mutagen for 1 minute. So it's a lot like drain bonded item, frankly, for a wizard. You get to reuse something you've already used for free. Not bad, but considering like with a wizard, that's just a core class feature that all wizards have. And here it is a subclass feature. It just doesn't feel like quite enough to me. So hopefully the mutagen gets some love in Player Core 2. Now on to the last research field. We have a Tengu toxicologist. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? This is a Tengu. The background is noble genealogy. The class is Alchemist, and the subclass is toxicologist. This is a noble warrior who uses poisons as a sophisticated choice during combat. The heritage is Wave Diver Tengu. I'll talk about why I think that's cool later. The ancestry feat, I went with Tengu Weapon Familiarity. That will give us access to the katana and the wakizashi. That is going to be a very good combination for this build. The toxicologist is all about using poisons. Now, let's talk about the way that poisons work and how this weapon combination will be helpful. So there are different types of poisons that are administered different ways, but for the most part, we are focusing here on damage poisons, meaning if you slash or pierce something with a poison on your weapon, you administer a dose of poison to that creature. That creature then needs to make a save against the poison. If they fail, they will advance to stage 1 of that poison. Now, remember, multiple exposures do tick up the stage. This is from, I think, page 430 in Player Core. For a poison, however, failing the initial saving throw against a new exposure increases the stage by 1. So, if you poison each of your weapons, and remember that the katana is 1 or 2-handed, and the wakizashi is just 1-handed, you want to poison both with the same poison, like your centipede, giant centipede venom, for example. And then you want to strike that creature twice. Ideally, both will hit. The creature will fail both of their saves, and then you've done an extra 2d4 total and left that creature fatigued. If you're using the giant centipede poison, other poisons have different conditions. And then ideally, that creature continues to fail saving throws afterwards for the max duration of the poison, and you can kind of just like let it sit there and, poison and die. Once you do that, you can then use the swap action. The swap action is helping out the toxicologist quite a lot to stow your wakizashi and take out another poison. And then for one action, you can apply that poison to your katana. Only one action, because that is the bonus that is given to this particular subclass, the toxicologist, is you can apply a poison onto a weapon for 1 rather than 2 actions. And then after that, if you do hit and you do poison another thing, you've used 3 poisons in a combat, and I think at that point you can go 2-handed on the katana for that extra damage dice. or not extra, but larger damage dice, I should say. As far as other formulas go, arsenic is a really good option. It is another poison. It is a non-combat poison, though, because it is consumed. And this is a good way to, be an assassin, to poison someone's food or drink. I would recommend taking some antidotes and elixirs of life for help and healing. A blight bomb, maybe for some ranged options. It also is a poison, so it's very fitting for this creature. And then, if you combine that Wave Diver Heritage, which gives you a swim speed, plus the blowgun, plus the subtle delivery class feat. Let's take a look at that. Your blowgun strikes can apply injury poisons even if they deal no damage due to a creature's resistance. If you critically succeed at an attack roll using a blowgun loaded with a dart you've poisoned, and the target rolls a failure on the poison's initial save, the target critically fails instead. You combine all that, and you have an infiltration assassin. You can swim across a moat, pop up, and blow dart someone. I think that would be very cool. But issues to improve with this build, even though I think this actually worked out quite well. Poisons, as I've said, they require hitting, they require a failed save, and then another round or two to really get the full effect of that poison for it to pay off. That's tough. And then also considering if you're going up against constructs or rock creatures or, I don't know, maybe oozes and other things. I forget. Just like there are a lot of creatures out there that are going to have very good fort saves and just be immune to poisons, period. So you'll be pretty helpless in those situations. And then, again, not really any great feats. Yes, I did go with subtle delivery, but if you notice, this is not really a ranged build with just a +1 dex. And subtle delivery isn't that fantastic of a feat, if you ask me. So it would be good to see another class feat that is specifically designed for the toxicologist. And that being said, that's it for these 4 builds. That's it for the 4 subclasses, the research fields of the Alchemist. I am incredibly excited for what changes. I already know what some of them are. They've already been discussed. I'm not talking about that now. We'll talk about it later when we rebuild these. So if you enjoyed this, go ahead and give this a like. And if you would like to see what these characters look like after the rebuild, make sure to subscribe, and we will be rebuilding these characters in about 6 to 8 weeks or so. Until then, remember, Bomber isn't the only viable subclass, but it's definitely the most fun. I mean, who doesn't want to be a splash damage climbing Goblin Chaos Warrior on the battlefield? I know I sure do. Take care, adventurers.